رولا، بتقدري تبدي لو سمحتي؟ تفضلي.
تمام. شكرا أستاذ أيمن. في البداية بحب أرحب فيكم جميعا فردا فردا. برحب فيكم باسم جمعية المدربين الفلسطينيين وباسم الجمعية الألمانية لتعليم الكبار الدي في انترناشونال. اليوم وضمن ملتقى خبراء التدريب اللي بيعقده البي تي اي وبشكل دوري ومنتظم. احنا في اللقاء أو الجلسة الرقم 62، واحنا كالجمعية الألمانية دي في انترناشونال سعداء جدا في مشاركتنا بتنظيم هذا اللقاء لليوم. آم، أنا رح أحكي شوي شوي عشان كمان ميري تقدر هي تلحق الترجمة لأنكا. اليوم وضمن اهتماماتنا المشتركة إحنا وجمعية المدربين رح نسلط الضوء على دراسة عالمية حول تعلم وتعليم الكبار والتعلم مدى الحياة من منظور عالمي، واللي هي هاي الدراسة بتتطرق للعوائق والاستراتيجيات للتعامل معها في هذا القطاع. متحدثتنا لليوم راح تكون معنا هي الدكتورة أنكا جروتلتشن. الدكتورة أنكا هي بروفيسور في التعلم مدى الحياة في جامعة هامبورغ. تركزت أبحاثها على تقييم مسارات التعلم مدى الحياة. بتقدم الاستشارات للسياسات التعليمية في ألمانيا. أيضا هي شغلت مناصب قيادية في شراكات دولية وأوروبية. هي حاصلة على الماجستير في العلوم التربوية والسياسية والنفسية والدكتوراه بالتعليم الرقمي. أهلا وسهلا دكتورة أنكا. كمان زي ما بنحب نرحب في ميري خوري معنا اليوم في الترجمة. شكرا لك ميري لوجودك معنا. كمان بنحب نسمع ترحيب سريع وبسيط من من الأستاذ أيمن، رئيس مجلس إدارة جمعية المدربين.
شكرا رولا على هذا التقديم. بداية، أهلا وسهلا بالجميع الإخوة والأخوات الأعزاء. بنتشرف فيكم في بداية هذا العام وباكورة أنشطة جمعية المدربين الفلسطينيين للعام 2025 بهذا اللقاء الذي نظم بالتعاون بين جمعية المدربين الفلسطينيين والجمعية الألمانية لتعليم الكبار. علاقتنا مع الجمعية الألمانية لتعليم الكبار هي علاقة ممتدة عبر سنوات طويلة، بدأت من بداية المنتدى الفلسطيني للتدريب السنوي الذي يعقد كل عام، وكان منهم كل الدعم والتسهيلات للجمعية بحيث أنه يقام هذا المنتدى بأفضل ما يكون. فعلاقتنا علاقة استراتيجية مع شريك استراتيجي، وإحنا بنعتز بشراكتنا معهم، وإن شاء الله حنعزز هذه العلاقة إن شاء الله في المستقبل بشكل أكثر وأقوى إن شاء الله.
شكرا
نحن
أستاذ أيمن.
اليوم أمام فرصة ثمينة للاستفادة من خبرات قيمة تقدمها لنا الباحثة الألمانية الدكتورة أنكا جروتليشن. تشرفنا بمشاركتها، اللي بنتشرف بمشاركتها في هذا اللقاء لعرض ومناقشة رؤاها ودراستها حول العوائق والاستراتيجيات في تعلم وتعليم الكبار. موضوع الورشة يعكس التزامنا بتعزيز ثقافة التعلم المستمر، خاصة في ظل التحديات اللي بيواجهها شعبنا الفلسطيني. فالتعلم مدى الحياة ليس مجرد اختيار، بل هو حاجة أساسية لبناء أفراد قادرين على التفاعل مع المتغيرات التي تحدث في العالم حولنا، وأيضا حتى نتكيف ونتعامل مع ظروف الحرب التي تشن على شعبنا الفلسطيني، والتي نأمل من الله أن تنتهي قريبا جدا إن شاء الله. ما يميز هذا اللقاء ليس فقط الموضوع التعلم مدى الحياة، بل تسليط الضوء على دراسات وخبرات عالمية، حيث يعتبر ملتقى خبراء التدريب منصة تتيح تبادل المعرفة والخبرات بين مجتمعنا الفلسطيني وخبرائه، وأيضا بين الخبراء العالميين مثل الدكتورة أنكا. هذا اللقاء فرصة للاستفادة من هذه التجارب وتطبيقها على أرض الواقع والنهوض بالتعليم والتدريب، وبحيث أنه يكون هناك له أثر واستدامة في حياة شعبنا الفلسطيني وتسهيل حياته. أدعوكم جميعا للاستفادة من هذا اللقاء وطرح تساؤلاتكم ومداخلاتكم، فالتفاعل هو المفتاح للاستفادة الحقيقية إن شاء الله، وتبادل الخبرات بينكم وبين الدكتورة أنكا. أشكر الجمعية الألمانية لتعليم الكبار على دعمها، والدكتورة أنكا على تخصيص وقتها الثمين، وكل من ساهم في إنجاح هذا اللقاء. نتمنى لكم لقاء مثمرا ومفيدا في بداية هذا العام، ونتطلع إلى تعزيز شراكاتنا المستقبلية لخدمة مجتمعنا الفلسطيني إن شاء الله. دمتم بخير وتعلم دائم، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. شكرا لكم.
شكرا أستاذ أيمن. هلأ بدنا نروح نشوف الدراسة، الاستراتيجيات، العوائق وكيف تم التعامل معها في هذا القطاع. بنستمع للدكتورة آنكا.
Okay, thank you so much. That was a very nice introduction, and I'm happy that you invited me, and I still find it thrilling to be connected to so many people in the world and who live under completely different circumstances than we do. So if you feel that what I present to you has nothing to do with you, then just give me a sign that I can skip some slides, or in the discussion, make sure that you come to the questions or the aspects that you find relevant, because we are not always like Hamburg University is not in the places where we collected data from. So thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Ayman, for that very inviting speech, and I do understand that you have a lot of responsibilities, so thanks for being here, at least for the beginning. And thank you, Ms. Rula, for facilitating this workshop. I see that this is somehow a community that knows each other. I see the different interactions, and I find that fascinating how easy this became since we use Zoom, etc. I will share some slides. I will try to stick to the slides so that you can follow me if you, by chance, read a bit English. And I will try to make it as easy as possible to you, Mary Guri, for I would be completely lost in translation or lost in languages, because I don't speak Arabic or any other language that would help me here. So I'll share slides. Just recently was in Uzbekistan on behalf of, that was the wrong presentation. On behalf of DVV International, and I was completely lost because I don't speak Russian. So there are some languages to learn for me. I will just start the presentation. And now I obviously shared the wrong moment. Obviously share my my view and not yours. This is a simple Zoom trick. Do you see the full presentation by now, or do you still see my view with the?
Yes, we see your presentation.
You see it as full screen, or do you see it as with my small items and notes as well?
Full
That's a
screen.
big.
Full presentation. Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so as Rula already mentioned, DVV International asked us to conduct an international study on adult learning and education in lifelong learning, and we focused on hindrances and strategies. And we means that I did that together with a colleague from Rutgers University, that's the logotype here, in the USA. Markus Erdner was my doctoral student at that time, and Keiko Yasukawa is a senior lecturer at the Technical University in Sydney, so we try to cover different parts of the globe in order to get a better interpretation of findings. And I'm trying to offer you some insights on the problem that we discussed with Uwe Gartenschläger, who said there is obviously kind of a shift from adult learning and education towards lifelong learning, which then covers learning from cradle to grave, from the first to the last moment in life. And we did a literature review to check whether that is true in the database. We also tried to figure out whether we find data, sound data, that prove the impact of adult learning and education. And a spoiler, there is a lot of research on that. And we then developed the research questions and method that was a data collection. Decided to have 4 levels that we focus on, and what is obviously new to the area is the mega level, that is the supranational level of adult or educational policies. You probably know the macro level, that's the national level of educational policies. The meso level, that's where we put the associations, also associations like DVV International. And the micro levels would be the training institutions and the trainings that take place in every area. And so we try to come to a conclusion and present a model and some recommendations. So the basic problem, the question, is there a shift from lifelong, within the terminology of lifelong learning? So we went back to the French Four report in 1972, when lifelong learning was definitely understood as adult learning. That was when the term became prominent. And in the 2000s, the European Union and the OECD dominated the discourse here. And they brought the term employability into the game. But employability implies adults. So if you think about the memorandum of lifelong learning by the European Union, then it is all about employability, so it is all about adults. Thinking of lifelong learning at that time meant we think about adult learning. And this shifted with the 2015 Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, when the term lifelong learning now is equal to all age groups. That means early childhood education, primary education, secondary, tertiary education, and then adult learning and education is kind of a surplus, but it is not the full idea of lifelong learning anymore. In 2022, the Confintea conference in Marrakesh was a huge and international UNESCO adult education conference that had their Marrakesh Framework for Action as the final document, and this claims adult learning and education as a key component of lifelong learning. So people are fighting for adult learning and education within the terminology of lifelong learning. But at the same time, the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning published a book saying Making Lifelong Learning a Reality, and it claims in many regions lifelong learning remains at the margins of national policies, and many countries still confine the term, so narrow the term, to adult education only, the non-formal education or continuing education. So the UIL criticizes that countries put adult education at the center of lifelong learning. And the UIL then continues, this tendency neglects the holistic value of lifelong learning. So the question whether there is a certain shift should be answered with yes, there is a shift, and this shift marginalizes adult learning and education within the term of lifelong learning. And this is not the heritage that we had. The heritage of the term lifelong learning is clearly adult learning. So this is something to fight back. So yes, Uwe Gartenschläger and Katharina Popovic were right with their question, is there a shift? And on this, at the same time, regarding empirical data, the question is whether or not we find that adult learning and education is worth investing in. So if you want to convince donors or governments or companies, then you usually need data. So we searched for some of the data. And actually I found like 12 studies, longitudinal representative studies on labor market effects, on something like 7 studies on social welfare effects. So this is just a conclusion or a summary of all these studies. And we find the effects everywhere. So long-term longitudinal studies with often more than 10,000 people who answered the questionnaires over time, sometimes all their lifetime. These longitudinal studies say for short workshops, like 2 days or half a day workshops, you have clear labor market effects and you have clear effects on income. And for long programs like half a year or 2-year programs, we also find clear benefits in terms of labor market outcomes and individual income. You find these effects in the 1980s, in the 1990s, in the 2000s, and in 2010s. So it shows up in every decade. It's completely independent from the time you conduct this kind of research. And you find it in Sweden and Germany on the one hand, like on welfare states, but you also find it in the United States and the UK, that is under neoliberal regimes. So it is independent from the type of regime you have. There is a labor market and an individual income effect when you participate in adult learning and education, a positive effect. And you find that effect in difficult labor markets and also in prospering labor markets. So it's an effect in that time means statistically significant effects in terms of outcomes of money that either you earn individually or your state or nation earns as a whole, as an economy. And regarding the market equilibrium, this is when you say my country doesn't offer any jobs or not many jobs. Albrecht et al. Found that the economy follows the labor force. So when the labor force is skilled and the labor force is willing and there, then the economy thinks it's a good idea to invest where the labor force is. That's what's meant by the term market equilibrium. We have similar effects on social cohesion, well-being, better lives, with the variables that are in these longitudinal studies. That's very few variables, but some are available. And the first study has a very disappointing finding, because it says you can be satisfied in your life without participating in adult learning and education. So all variables except life satisfaction have positive effects. That's what Kanderat et al. Find in 2021. Earlier studies say that the feeling of personal meaningfulness increases. So the adult education and learning helps to fight back mental health issues and mental or loneliness in aging societies. Health, so subjective health, but also physical health increases, physical well-being increases. And the cognitive skills like verbal ability, memory, and fluency improves. That's also known by Hedge et al. Some say that long-term adult learning and education programs help reducing social inequalities in all countries under consideration. That has been built on data from Australia, Czech Republic, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Germany, Great Britain, Hungary, Italy, Russia, Spain, and Sweden, and the USA. So for those countries who have this kind of long-term longitudinal surveys, we find very positive effects from investment into adult learning and education onto both the labor markets as well as social cohesion and better lives. And investing in adult education is usually less costly than investing in early childhood or investing in primary education or secondary education. So that's perhaps the encouraging information that helps you to convince your donors or your partners and supporters. And from this moment, from where we are in terms of the terminology, what is lifelong learning, and the knowledge that does make sense to invest in adult education as the key component of lifelong learning, we developed the research questions and the collection of data and methods. So the research question 1 was, what strategies for implementing adult learning and education as part of lifelong learning are reported as effective in focal countries and regions? And the question 2 is, what challenges hinder the implementation of adult learning and education with regard to Sustainable Development Goal 4 on education, given that SDG 4 does not talk of education but of lifelong learning and uses a term of lifelong learning that marginalizes adult learning and education. Together with a team from DVV International, we decided what countries to get into the focus group design. And we had a mix of countries that consist of countries where DVV International is very present, and countries where Alisa, Keiko, and I have good contacts and connections. So it turned out to be Australia, Brazil, Jordan, Kyrgyzstan, India, South Africa, Thailand, and Ukraine. So we covered like more Asian than other regions, but in a way, different continents and different types of country. We started asking for the positive aspects and then asked for the negative aspects. But when it came to presenting the findings, we decided to come up with the hindrances and then show which strategies are applied to overcome the hindrances. So I start with the mega level crisis. We didn't really ask for mega levels. We asked for what kind of hindrances do you face? And the question, the type of answers was usually not, we have a problem with our educational ministry because they don't listen to us. The type of answer that we received was mega level crisis by all countries. So we decided to have a category saying, okay, this is a mega level because these crises take place in many countries in the world, and these crises affect many policies like educational, but also health policies, interior, exterior ministries, social and economic policies. So that's why we call them mega. And we said that hunger, diseases, and war is what happened there. Like in Brazil, the focus group said the country is back on the hunger map these last 6 years, and the economic model and the ALE curricula are unsustainable. The data collection took place in 2022. So it was slightly after the Ukraine war, or the Russian attack onto the Ukraine took place, but before the conflict you're sitting in the middle of, or the escalation of that conflict. So Brazil said the country is back on the hunger map, and that refers to the Bolsonaro regime in Brazil that was voted out of power by the end of 22. It was difficult enough to find focus group partners because many obviously didn't want to criticize on a very powerful and complicated government, right-wing government that put a lot of pressure onto adult education and learning. So the country came back onto the hunger map under the populist regime. Kyrgyzstan said we have migrants, and during Corona they return home and have a lot of questions: where to live, where to work, etc. So COVID was a problem. South Africa reported we have seen this particular sector, that is the adult basic education, we have seen this particular sector taking a huge knock. When it came to the COVID, factories decided to shut down. We had AVET, adult vocational education and training, in the form of workers training, literally stopping, and it never came back after the lockdown stopped. And Ukraine partners reported that many experts died. Some have left Ukraine, and we are not sure if they come back. Some are taking part of the army. So this is so substantially hitting adult education and learning that it was a surprise for us. We knew about, of course, about the conflict and the COVID and the diseases, but we didn't know that it hits so directly the adult education infrastructure. What follows from crisis, climate change and war and water conflicts and fossil conflicts, etc., what follows from crisis is unfortunately a rise of populism, far-right extremism, discrimination, and with this discrimination comes defunding of adult learning and education. And we see that in Brazil. The focus group said, and for the last 4 years we never had it so bad. In resources, the budget fell by not 100%, it fell 100 times. A complete disintegration in terms of structure. And from India, the focus group reported, after the new government came in 2014, they mean a Hindu nationalist government under Narendra Modi, which is still in place, they say everything changed. Now they allocate very, very little amount to adult education because the focus is on nationalism. The focus is on other things. A lot of funding is used to translate everything from English to Hindu and to vernacular languages. So it is the funding is used for propaganda, for religious propaganda, and for Hinduism and anti-Muslim propaganda in India. And South Africa reported what happens in our schools is young women are being raped at the space that's supposed to be safe. So discrimination and vandalism takes place in several countries. So we're leaving the mega level challenges and try to jump to the macro level challenges and the implementation strategies that adult learning and education associations try to use. On macro level, the challenges are the educational policies, as we expected, of funds shifting towards all age groups, as it is called in the Sustainable Development Goals. And most countries reported that every politician gives lip service to the SDGs, but the SDGs in a way reinforce formal education. So we end up with adult education and learning being the underfunded stepchild. And so far, this is the case with or without the SDGs. That had been the case earlier, and it just goes on. So some countries say the state has no funds or doesn't want to fund the whole educational system, or formal adult education underwent a shift to learning, like in Thailand. Regarding adults, the priority is skills and formal, technical, and vocational education and training. That was in several countries. Adult learning and education is treated as the afterthought. And in a way, companies, corporate social responsibility programs, self-payment, and international donors jump into the gap and try to fill it, but they fill it with an unstable funding system. So especially non-formal adult education is vulnerable. On the other hand, when you get funding, you also get bureaucratic control. So with funding comes control, and also was clear. So there's a quasi-successful implementation of adult learning and education. For example, we find responsibilities in ministries. So there is someone who can be sent to the conventia, or there is someone who is responsible for filling the grail, or who can be asked whether he or she wants to join the Learning Cities movement. There are bills or laws or strategy papers or concepts in every corner of the world, sometimes together with the vocational and technical law, sometimes as national qualifications frameworks, and sometimes there are assessment frameworks like in South Africa. In a way, this touches formal, non-formal, and informal adult learning and education. And most of these plans and strategy papers are pushed forward or implemented through activities by meso-level associations. So the associations like PETA or associations on a global level like DVVI are the ones who push this process. Wow. The important actors. On the meso level, of course, we have special hindrances and strategies. So the core hindrances are staff and quality. So can partners ensure quality of adult learning and education? There's sometimes a lack of professionalization. In some countries, adult learning and education relies on volunteers or on teachers from the vocational education system. That's vocational school education usually. On the other hand, there are quality controls or accreditation systems and licenses reported to be two sides of the same medal. So sometimes they have benefits for the training institutions, but sometimes they are also used by authorities to overly control the training institutions. The strategies on the meso level are coordination and advocacy. So one partner said it's all about networking and partnerships. The associations and their activities. So they associations use conferences, forums, and committees to point to their to the relevance of adult education and lifelong learning. They use research and reporting and statistics, and that's not only the Sustainable Development Goal monitoring or the GRAIL, but in many other ways. There are small questionnaires in place that are used to advocate for a good new program. In some countries, learner pathways are implemented from like a first course to a vocational education system or to universities. And there's a kind of an ambivalent discussion on cooperating with primary, secondary, and tertiary education, because it means you can also end up in a straitjacket. So Jordan reports from a 3-year program for early school leavers that allows further formal or vocational education, so that's just in between two of the stronger pillars of the educational system, and that was reported to work well. And on the other hand, South Africa reported that when the school principal will not open up the school, then the class, the adult education class, will not take place. So we are completely dependent from the primary school principal. So that's both ends of, or two sides of the medal. On the micro level, the challenges are a bit smaller, but still, I think something that everyone knows. The idea of inclusive lifelong learning for all here means there are around the world problems with inequality and access. So ALE partners try to address these problems. For example, India says they try to address women in rural area with literacy programs, so the women cannot write, so you can't send a written flyer or email with the program. And they said, to be more inclusive, we send voicemails. So they use smartphone voicemail systems and try to address people who are illiterate with that approach. From South Africa, we learned that non-traditional adult learners who haven't had previous access to formal schooling, who are in environments from which previously they were excluded from because of race, ethnicity, now enter adult learning and education. That's post-apartheid South Africa. And butts on seats is an issue in many countries, so how to get the people into the ALE courses or community education centers. And Brazil reported, together we mobilized, we talked to the building workers, so they just went to the construction sites and tried to convince building workers to come to the landless workers movement courses in Brazil. And in South Africa, they also said the teachers go from house to house in the townships, because only for butts on seats you get paid. Micro-level strategies answer pretty much the Marrakesh Framework for Action. The three basic areas in ALE are: first, basic adult education, literacy and compensatory schooling. The second is professional development, unemployment and retraining. And the third is citizenship education and grassroots activities. And that's what I like to focus on, because on the micro level, especially the grassroots activities answer the crisis. So without a law, without a policy strategy, without proper funding, there is still, how did Mr. Ayman say it, there's still a need to learn, and there's a need to overcome crises and catastrophes. So people start doing that. For example, addressing sexual harassment in India, women's circles say they make a collective voice by using arts. They have depicted the kind of violence happened to them 10 years ago when they were a child or in the workplace. And they put it on sari, that's cloth, they painted it on sari. That's something women wear in India. And they presented that sari to the Deputy Chief Minister of Delhi and then advocated for better coverage and better infrastructure where they can report sexual harassment, and that improved the situation in Delhi. Another grassroots movement that is still underway and growing is the Cape Town Together, or the community action networks in South Africa. They are so-called growers networks, so people grow produce, they grow food. The community action networks first, after the COVID lockdown in the townships, formed soup kitchens and kept on going those based on donations from the neighborhood. But then realized that's not sustainable either, because the donations became scarce. And then they understood that they have to start growing their own. And this is a huge movement to grow food in townships or around townships. And people don't ask who owns the land or whether the land is something where you can grow whatever, pumpkin or potatoes. They just get going. And in Ukraine, the community education centers say, we hope that sometime our people will come back from the war regions full of energy, full of desire, that was in 22, full of desire to change their life and our economic situation, from a fossil situation to an ecological economy, from a post-Soviet situation to an EU country. And we hope that they want to be trained to change their working sphere. And another grassroots movement is in remote Queensland in Australia. They have so-called men's sheds. That's a basic movement held upright by elderly men. And they support recovery from successive droughts and bushfires and floods that have had devastating impacts in many rural and remote communities. This is in the conclusion what we call, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And we try to put everything in one model, and the yellow slides of the model say this is the regular ALE policy process. So this is when associations and researchers are influencing educational and labor market policies that are issued by the ministries. The associations and the advisors use several strategies to overcome hindrances, and they implement quite some effective structures on policy levels. But when crisis hits very hard, then we find activism with ALE as an answer to political crisis, with grassroots structures and self-help groups taking ownership of their resources and ownership of their problems, trying to survive and overcome hunger, war, and disease. This also seems an answer to populist and authoritarian political systems. What we find in all countries is a funding dilemma. The more informal, flexible, responsive the approaches are, the more precarious they are. But the more regulated and sufficiently funded they are, the more they are controlled by authorities. And we try to put this into one model. You find that in the in the book on page 9. And I would like to point to the mega level crisis in blue here, such as hunger, diseases, war, and nationalism, populism, and discrimination, and the very fast and flexible and quick answers on micro levels that we call, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. Or the other strategies, like how meso-level organizations advocate for adult learning and education. It's like we have networking and partnerships, you go through conferences, forums, statistics, research, bring systems together. You have macro-level hindrances like the lip service to ALE, meso-level hindrances like staff and quality issues. You have micro-level hindrances like inclusive lifelong learning for all. You try to overcome them by influencing the macro-level educational policies. Again, the whole yellow procedure is the regular policy-making procedure under what we call normal circumstances, like in a way peace or frozen conflicts and more or less healthy societies. But when crisis hits, then the blue version gets going. That's the final model that we come up with. How we think meso macro levels interact. And we had some recommendations, but I think not all recommendations work for everyone. So we said it makes sense to build and support sustainable networks and work as associations, because the speakers of associations are invited by policymakers to have a certain say on educational strategies. Build coordination across stakeholders and within sectors that engage with ALE, and recognize and encourage grassroots efforts. Support the collection and use of high quality data. I tried to bring some data to you to encourage you, to empower you and your negotiations. Try to reinforce the importance of lifelong and life-wide approaches to learning. And of course, you're invited to use the longitudinal study findings, leverage flexibility and responsiveness. So just point to the fact that adult learning and education is so fast and so flexible and so responsive to crisis. It is much faster than the regular formal school system. And we saw that in many other examples. I had to narrow the presentation down to what I can do in like 35 minutes, and ensure that ALE keeps open in the wide range of education, training, civic needs that learners need for their adulthood, and provide meaningful support at the different levels. So that was my presentation, and I hope that this was somehow interesting for you.
شكرا جزيلا أنكا. زي ما شفنا من الدراسة عكست من واقع تعليم وتعلم الكبار في فلسطين وجود تقارب في النتائج ما بين الدراسة والنتائج والواقع التعلم وتعليم الكبار في فلسطين. وواضح كمان إنه الدراسة أكدت إنه تعلم وتعليم الكبار بيعطي المرونة للسياق المحلي لتلبية احتياجات الناس من خلال تعليم الكبار نفسه. كمان شفنا من الدراسة إنه في أبحاث علمية كبيرة دعمت أهمية تعلم وتعليم الكبار، خاصة في تلبية احتياجات سوق العمل وتوفير الدخل للناس، بالإضافة للتماسك والرفاه الاجتماعي في المجتمعات ما بين الناس. وهذا الأمر بالتأكيد بتقاطع مع بشكل كتير كبير مع قطاع التدريب وعمل المدربين في فلسطين. فكمان مرة thank you very much أنكا. بنحب إذا في حد عنده مداخلة أو باب التعليق أو أي سؤال أو استفسار بنرحب في استفساراتكم. إذا حدا بحب يعلق أو يحكي أي مداخلة. الأستاذة عايدة.
مساء الخير.
أهلا.
يعطيك العافية رولا. شكرا لك وشكرا لجمعية المدربين الفلسطينيين. I will speak in English to Mrs. Anka. So thank you very much for this is a fruitful presentation. It is really very informative. Can you hear me? Can you hear me right now?
Okay, I just have to switch from the or put back the original voice.
Okay.
So I stopped it. So Ida, I can hear you now.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to thank you for this very informative presentations. It's really very fruitful and it highlights many topics actually regarding adult learning and lifelong learning. Actually, I want first my first question is about that you mentioned something that lifelong learning increase healthy lifestyle and increase well-being and many things. But you mentioned that except life satisfaction. So my question is to you, why? Yani I was surprised by this actually this findings because I think it is almost goes together that when you have good education you should at the end it will increase your life satisfaction because you will be get more money, more freedom, more better jobs, better life being. So I want to know about this your opinion. The second issue is that that what happened يعني what is your suggestions, practical suggestions for communities who are suffering from wars and يعني when things are getting very bad, we remember how things goes in corona. So communities totally think about how to manage, how to help themselves, how to focus on these issues. So in these crises, what is the best solution? What is the best recommendation for communities and people who are working in education and adult learning so we can maintain good adult learning? I wish to have your answer, and really, I'm very pleased to meet you, and really, it is very nice. My last point is Mrs. Anka, or that we still need a good focus. Also, for people who are in training education, we still use the adult learning education. We still focused. We still on this, and how we can get to lifelong learning, how we can increase people who see the thing in this way. Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ida, for the very skilled questions. I think I have to click into my English and translated word again. Hope that worked now. So that was, we also thought, why is that so? That people can be satisfied even though we would all say that education matters for being satisfied, for having a healthy life, for having a life where the relations are balanced or differentiated, well, personal closeness and the resilience, the ability to overcome shocks, etc., is better. We think that satisfaction is something that can also rise with education. So the more educated you are, the more within the world you understand, and you see the political problems, you see the inequalities, you see the unfairness. So it is a very personal thing whether or not you feel satisfied. People can be very satisfied in a farmer's situation where they have a couple of cows and are fine with everything. That's not necessarily a high-end education, but it can be a satisfying life. So that's our discussion of the measurement of satisfaction. That's obviously somehow difficult, and I would of course support the idea that more education in the end makes life more interesting to live and more connected, and you understand many more things. And that's not necessarily nicer to understand many things, but it's perhaps still worth it. And yeah, so that's the satisfaction problem. And moreover, it's a German longitudinal study, so German ways of being satisfied are probably different than Palestinian or West Bank aspects. On practical suggestions, as a researcher, I'm not very practical, so I have to build on what people told us in the other focus groups. When war hit in Ukraine, the community education centers used their networks to find teachers who are able to react to the problems they have, like, for example, providing first aid courses or surviving in the cold without energy, or talking to children about war or what it means when the fathers go to war. So many of these activities had been organized immediately via the community education centers, and they somehow relieve things because you have someone to talk to. You have a group. You have an organized group. And what they also reported is that they try to keep a structure of cultural activities. They mentioned tango courses, dancing courses, whatever is relevant for people, because they said it needs something to build resilience, to overcome this devastating look around where everything is getting darker and darker. So that would be a suggestion I would also report to you. And the last thing is from the women's circles in India, who said sexual harassment and rape in India is extreme. So many women have experienced that. And this is something where you don't have any answer. It doesn't make sense to rape women. But being together and using arts and starting women's circles to become independent also meant that they have circles on how to handle money, even if you can't write, but when you can count and start your own miniature business, or like having women's savings clubs where they can put 100 rupees every month, and when one of them needs something because a child is ill, etc., they can get a small loan from this common savings. That's infrastructure that they build on their own. That's grassroots work. And the South African partners said they combine vocational education and training with social and political training, like handling drugs, substance abuse, etc. So they intermix it. They say they get more funding for vocational education, but they try to get the social aspects into vocational education. So that's what I can offer um, from what practitioners told us.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anka.
شكرا عايدة. في أي مداخلة تانية يا جماعة؟ حدا بيحب يسأل أو يضيف؟ تمام. في عنا ميري، إذا بتشوفي بالتشات سؤال من ختام، إنه ليش الدراسة ما شملت فلسطين أو في عينة الدراسة المجموعة البؤرية؟
Yeah, no idea. Um, um, I remember the negotiations with DVVI, and many people from different regions in the world were on that meeting, but I can't say who was from what region. We wanted a balance of countries, but I can't say why it was Jordan and not Palestine from the region. So, and we ended up with Jordan. So there was nothing like we are Germans and we don't want to work with Palestine or something like that, because no, that's completely. It was at that time perhaps just a question to balance the regions of the world, but not the countries. What would you say that is would be a different experience that Palestine would add? Would you say that the grassroots activities that we found, or the micro level activities, would be different than in the model, or like the meso level activities? If we had added Palestine, would that change the findings? That would be very interesting.
Excuse me, can I add something to this point, please? If you allow me, Anka, please.
ثواني عايدة، بس خلينا نشوف في حد بحب يساهم في الجواب على سؤال آنكا، بخصوص في حال تم إنه دمج المقدمي أو مزودي خدمات تعليم الكبار في فلسطين، هل بتشوفوا رح يكون في تأثير في الدراسة؟
رولا في ضحى رافعة إيدها، عاملة ريز هاند.
ضحى، بتحبي تضيفي ولا عندك سؤال تاني؟
لا، بحب أضيف أشارك في هذا السؤال. مساء الخير.
أكيد.
يعطيكم العافية، شكرا على جهودكم.
أهلا.
حابة أضيف إنه فعلا يعني إنه موضوع دراسة تعلم الكبار، إحنا يعني إحنا عم نحضر الورشة، ولما بتحكي عن تعلم الكبار المفروض يكون في دراسة احتياج لمنطقة الأراضي الفلسطينية، إنه الفئات العمرية أو الكبار هم بحاجة لتعليم، هم بحاجة لتدريب مهني، هم بحاجة لورشات دعم نفسي. فأكيد لازم يكون في دراسة حتى نقدر إحنا يكون في تعاون بيننا وبين المؤسسات اللي برا، أو على الأقل يكون إحنا كمؤسسات فلسطينية نحاول نطبق هذا الإشي على أرض الواقع. فأنا بشوف إنه هذا موضوع التعلم الكبار بحاجة لدراسة احتياج لهاي الفئات، شو هم بيحتاجوا أكثر، سواء طبعا الذكور أو الإناث. شكرا لكم.
شكرا ضحى. بس كمان أنا بحب أعلق بصفتي، يعني أنا بشتغل مع الدي في في مجال تعليم الكبار. بالتأكيد إنه لو ساهمت عنا المراكز أو مزودي تعليم الكبار في فلسطين، أكيد رح يكون في لهم تأثير بالدراسة. وزي ما شفنا من الدراسة إنه في تقاطع ما بين النتائج والنتائج اللي شفناها والمعوقات اللي في الدراسة. بس كمان بحب أضيف لك ضحى، إنه تعليم الكبار في فلسطين عم يتم تزويده في المجتمعات عندنا بناء على دراسات تحديد احتياجات خاصة بالمجتمع نفسه. هي مش على مستوى إنه خلينا نقول فلسطين كاملة، ولكن هي على مستوى كل مجتمع بناء على تحديد احتياجاته.
إذا بتسمحي لي رولا، أعلق تعليق. يعني النتائج اللي تحدثت فيها الدكتورة أنكا هي نتيجة الأزمات والحروب مثل كورونا والحرب اللي مشنة على شعبنا الفلسطيني وغيرها. هذه الأزمات مثلا من النتائج موضوع بروز توجه النساء نحو التمكين الاقتصادي في ظل البطالة وضعف الاقتصاد الفلسطيني. صار في هناك توجه كبير وملحوظ من خلال، يعني أنا موقعي في الغرفة التجارية كمدير مركز الريادة وتطوير الأعمال، ومن خلال موقعي في جمعية المدربين الفلسطينيين، هناك توجه كبير للنساء نحو التمكين الاقتصادي وتعلم كيف يفتحوا أو ينشئوا مشاريع مدرة للدخل يعيلوا أسرهم في ظل هاي الحرب اللي إحنا بنعيشها. فهذه
بالتأكيد.
نتيجة تتشابه مع نتائج أي بلد فيها حروب، بتصور هذه
صحيح.
بتتشابه معها.
صحيح، وبتتلخص كمان في دور المراكز المجتمعية عم بتقدم تعليم الكبار في الفترة الحالية، في فترة الحرب اللي عم بنمر فيها في فلسطين. هي عم تستجيب بشكل كتير فعال للاحتياجات الطارئة في المجتمعات اللي هي موجودة فيها كمان.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Rula and Ms. Rula, Mr. Ayman. I find both things very relevant. I think we found them in several places in the study. So several countries are doing local needs assessment with small surveys or questionnaires, or just by talking to people and coming back, harvesting their opinions and organizing them, and find out what is necessary. And this is a very sound base for developing training programs or courses, workshops, whatever, in community education centers. And it's also a good base to convince donors or infrastructure holders. So that's something I would strongly support, and that's what I meant when building on research does not necessarily mean the Sustainable Development Goal monitoring or the Global Report on Adult Learning and Education. Building on research can be very small scale but effective local research that is to the point, where families live and where the problems are pressing. And empowering women is, we didn't say when the going gets tough, the women get going. But in many countries, the South African community action networks are completely female. And they started with the vaccination literacy, explaining how to spread vaccinations, whom to give it first, that it is nothing to be afraid of. That should have been something that the state had done, but the state just didn't do anything. So the women started getting organized and understanding how vaccination works. They used Facebook in that case, but any other system would also work, and had like every 2 weeks informal meetings where they shared their newly acquired knowledge and taught each other how to handle the COVID, how to protect yourself and your family, and how to get started with gardening and growing produce. And this goes on. They still have these Facebook, online meetings where groups of people teach each other how to survive or how to live sustainably in a crisis where nothing is available, no jobs, no nothing, sometimes no water. And again, I find it relevant, like in many areas of the world, DVV International provides courses that help starting small businesses or generating income, which often takes place with the children around. So you can integrate family, work, care responsibilities, and generating like your own money, which is quite important for the families.
تمام. الأستاذ وحيد.
Thank you, Rola, and thank you, Dr. Anka. Did you notice common hindrances and common challenges in your study in the different countries, that we can see these are common hindrances or common challenges that can be noticed in every country? Did you notice any of these common hindrances?
Yeah, I would say this being the afterthought. That is true for every country. So in each and every country, adult learning and education, even technical and vocational adult learning and education, is always the last one when it comes to funding. Everything else is earlier. Earlier childhood funding, primary, secondary, tertiary education, further education, higher education, professional education, whatever. But sometimes even the language education for incomings and migrants, but adult learning and education is always the last one when it comes to funding, and the first one to be fought back or cut back. A second thing what was disturbing for us is the more right-wing a government is, the more easily they cut everything in adult learning and education, because they somehow find ALE being a threat to authoritarian regimes. And we had the recent PIAC study where Israel and the Palestinian population in Israel participated. And you can see the right-wing Israeli government effects, because Israel is now numbered at the whole country with all its population from whatever religion. The whole country is now number 27 out of 31 countries, so it lost ground. And this is mostly because the Arab population in Israel has really bad provision in literacy, numeracy, and digital education. So the foundational skills in the Arab population in Israel is so low that it affects the whole workforce within Israel, in terms of OECD, the human capital. And the researchers I know, mostly secular Jews in Israel, say this is devastating, and it's definitely an effect of right-wing or extreme right policies over decades. And we've seen similar effects in India and Brazil. So fighting back populist and extremist forces is a job all around the world. It's a global job for all kind of democratic or tolerant forces and groups and associations. So that's my learning from this study and from the recent PIAC study, Program for the International Assessment of Adult Competencies. So there are some worldwide challenges that are clearly the same across the world.
شكرا أنكا. في حد أي إضافات أي استفسارات تانية؟ أستاذ أحمد.
مساء الخير، يعطيكم العافية جميعا.
أهلا.
دكتورة أنكا، شكرا كثير على تسليط الضوء على العوائق في تعليم الكبار. يعني هذا موضوع كثير مهم، وكوننا مدربين وبنشتغل في موضوع التدريب، فكثير كان الموضوع والدراسة مهمة كثير لنا. من خلال الدراسة دكتورة، يعني أنا تبعت هذا من خلال الدراسة، دراستكم، شو كان العائق الأكثر تأثيرا على مشاركة الكبار في برامج التعلم؟ وهل ترون أن التكنولوجيا الحديثة يمكن أن تخفف من هذا العائق، أو ممكن أن تزيد من هذا العائق في موضوع تعليم الكبار؟ وشكرا دكتورة.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you for the very engaging question. We did not have so much reports on learning with Zoom or technologies, etc. And we find that on the one hand, for some partners, it is self-evident because they just use all the technologies they have. The more you come into the countryside or the rural areas, the more relevant it is to have learning technologies. But on the other hand, the more unstable the Wi-Fi provision and internet is. So this is kind of a balance. What we see is that everything that uses smartphones and not laptops or computers gets more easily into to the users, to the participants. But it needs kind of let me say a moderation, pedagogical or didactical competence from the training staff to engage people even though they are not in the same room, and it needs a certain warmth to really connect with people when you only see like a couple of words. The earlier findings from TV shows with an educational effect, like classroom hours, classroom teaching via TV, says that it usually reaches those who don't need it. So it is not, if it just put the system there and wait for the people to use it, then the more skilled, the more educated people use it, but not the ones who would really need it. That's the research finding that we had earlier. But it's a very interesting question on whether you can engage more learners with new technologies. So get going.
شكرا. في أي حد بحب يضيف؟
ممكن أنا أشارك؟
أكيد تفضلي.
يعطيكم العافية ومشكور كتير على هاي الورشة الرائعة، ومشكورة أستاذة أنكا. بدي أنوه لشغلة، إنه بالنسبة للتحديات اللي حكوا عنها وبالنسبة لتعلم الكبار، هو فعلا هي موجودة في مثلا في قطاع غزة أو موجودة في المجتمعات الفلسطينية، ولكن هناك سوء مثلا سوء التسويق لها أو سوء استخدام الورشات عمل أو الإعلان عنها أو سوء الإعلان بشكل صحيح لهي إنه يصير يدعموا التعلم الكبار. بالنسبة للدراسات، هو فعلا ما في دراسات كثيرة يعني درست على نحو الدراسات الكبار. بالنسبة لدراسة السنكة، شو هي اللي خلاكوا تتجهوا للدراسات عن التعلم عن الكبار؟ وشو هو اللي خلاكوا، يعني أكيد أخذتوا أكثر من دراسة وأكثر من توجهتوا لأكثر من مبحث أو هذا، فشو اللي خلاكوا الهدف الأساسي إنكم تتجهوا إنه تعملوا دراسة حول تعلم الكبار أو التركيز على هاي النقطة؟ يعطيكم العافية.
منى، إذا بتسمحي لو تترجمي لأنكا السؤال اللي تفضلت فيه قبل شوي الأستاذة نعمة، لأنه المترجمة يبدو صار معها في مشكلة في الإنترنت.
أي سؤال عفوا؟
كمان مرة.
يا ريت تعيدي نعمة سؤالك على السريع، على أساس إنهم يترجموه لأنكا، لأنه المترجمة في عندها مشكلة.
نعمة.
ألو؟
نعمة. إيش بس كمان مرة سؤالك؟
سمعي. شو هي الأهداف أو اللي خلتهم يركزوا على إنهم يعملوا دراسة على التعليم الكبار أو التركيز على هذا التعليم الكبار؟ شو الهدف اللي خلاهم يعملوا؟
Okay, Anka, the question is what is the آه تمام، شكرا ميري.
Initiates whose activity towards adult learning? The participants? Why participants? Or the partners who answered the focus groups. Actually, from what I heard from the focus groups, as well as many conferences where we go, the decision for adult learning and education as a professional is often the decision for the road less traveled. So somehow for the you don't follow the mainstream. When you are in education, the mainstream in education goes to primary school. Becomes a teacher in primary school, or my fellow students, my fellow researchers, my fellow professors, my fellow university colleagues, like 45 out of 46 focus on school. And people who are into adult learning and education around the world usually choose the road less traveled, so the way that is more adventurous somehow. And we find people like us find others who have that same spirit, so this connects us with each other. I think that's a strong motivator to do something that's new, that's innovative, that's very close, very flexible, very free from the influence of the authorities. I mean, we all depend on public funding, but still it is totally different than formal schooling. So we have much more freedom than formal school teachers. So perhaps that is a motivation why people end up in education on the professional side. And when it comes to participants, we find that oftentimes people start with certified programs where they need to go in order to get their certificate that allows them to continue to work. On the other hand, they sometimes continue because they got to know that it's good for them, and then they open up into a larger range of subject matters that's interesting for them.
شكرا.
I see there's a lot in the chat, and some chat parts are in English, and that obviously addresses me. I try to answer them if I have enough time.
أي سؤال يا جماعة؟ أي إضافة؟
Thank you. No.
لا تمام ميري، بنقدر نشوف الأسئلة على الشات وبعدها إن شاء الله بنكون خلصنا. أكيد. هلا في بعض منهم هم بالإنجليزي I think. إنه when we talk about adult learning it has to be about areas and needs other than youth and child education. Is there any study about these areas?
Allah had posted a question on adult learning and the areas and needs other than youth and child education. The study uses the Marrakesh Framework for Action to point to the kind of areas. So in many ways, it's basic adult education, literacy, compensatory schooling. That's the first. The second is in all countries around the world, professional development or retraining or overcoming unemployment for different jobs, and also for refugees, for incoming migrants or for returning migrants. And the third thing is citizenship education, that is how somehow moving towards a more equal society, moving towards a more tolerant society, moving towards more sustainable societies. So these are the three, overarching needs that I would take from the Marrakesh Framework for Action and from the study that we did.
تمام. بتوقع في عنا من الدكتورة رائدة، هي مداخلة وليست سؤال. Achieving Sustainable Development, a very important topic, especially by contributing to economic and social growth through empowering adult populations. وأظن شفنا كمان إنه هذا الإشي موجود في
I
الدراسة من
see
الأشياء، من النتائج كيف التأثير كان. تمام. في حد عنده أي إضافة؟ أستاذ أيمن؟
عندي سؤال للدكتورة أنكي بخصوص المقارنة بين الدول في موضوع اللايف لونج ليرنينج أو تعلم الكبار. هل هناك في مقارنات من ناحية إحصائية، أرقام وإحصاءات حول المقارنة بين الدول، وقديش درجة ومستويات التعلم بين الكبار؟ وهل هناك علاقة بين الأزمات والحروب والتعلم الكبار؟ يعني هل الدول اللي بيكون فيها أزمات وحروب درجة التعلم بتكون أعلى من الدول اللي ما فيها أزمات وحروب؟ يا ريت تسليط الضوء على هذا الموضوع.
Wow. Yes, on the one hand, we have the adult education survey in many European countries. The level of the participation rates across countries vary between 20% and 60%. So in the Nordic countries, 60% of the adult population participate in adult education at least once a year, and often several times a year. And in more or less the southern European countries, this may be 20-25% of the adult population. So, and it is on the rise, and steadily on the rise since the 1970s. So it is still something we invest in, especially with aging societies. The second question, crisis as we saw it, destroys adult learning and education, destroys the infrastructure, and the only thing that is left then is the grassroots movement or the immediate activities towards overcoming or surviving the crisis. But what happens after, especially after war or after revolution or after political turmoil, is that we usually have a rebuilding phase. I'm German, you know that we had that in after World War II. We had the political rebuilding and democracy strategies, civic education. But we also see that in many socialist countries, once they chased their dictators out of the country, like in Nicaragua, in Cuba, and wherever, they come up with an adult education strategy to implement the new system, in that case socialist, but it can also be a democratic system, and to teach the society, and the more progressive socialists or social democratic movements, they end up with teaching societies, educating their societies, because they believe in educated population. You also saw that in 1920s in early Turkey and Kemalist Turkey, that also came up with a strong literacy movement after the changes. And we recently saw that what we call in Europe the so-called Arab Spring, that also started a lot of retraining, relearning. And in post-Soviet countries, after the shift, of course, we had to provide a lot of vocational education and training for people who then found themselves unemployed after a lifetime of safe employment. So that yes, there is usually a rise of adult education and learning when you have shift. Currently, we have a very slow shift, a worldwide slow shift in climate change and climate injustice, and that does not cause as much adult education and training as it is necessary. So that would be my answer to this. I find it a fascinating question.
شكرا للجميع. اوكي، في عنا كمان بالشات، مش عارفة إذا في سؤال. I think إنه أحمد عم يشكر الدكتورة أنكا في and رائد added should be a global system and law for adult education as it is an important issue for sustainable development. صحيح، تمام، شكرا جزيلا. بحب أشكركم للمرة الثانية باسم جمعية عايدة. في عندك كمان مداخلة، بس خلينا تكون سريعة.
شكرا رولا. Just I want to add two things for this very, very nice and fruitful and informative information. يعني I wanted to add two things, if Anka allow me and agree with me. The first of all, that even if Palestine is not in the research, it doesn't matter, as so many countries are not in this research. The point is how to get use of the information that it is in the research, and use this information to generate and create ideas and create knowledge about the adult learning that the country can use according to their priorities and according to their problems. This is yani we should say that, because it's not necessarily to be in the research. You can take the knowledge and you can get benefit of this knowledge. The other thing that I want to, maybe I need your answer also, Anka, on this point, that we should differentiate in crisis when the adult learning is a must and is a need. Okay, we know that the crisis can hinder and prevent the adult education to be, but sometimes it is the solution. It is the surviving tool for others, as this happened around the world in Corona. So we have to be very careful in this. So you have to know your problems, the community problems, and you need to get reaction to these problems. And thank you very much. And it is a good, very nice to meet you. Thank you very much. شكرا لكم جميعا. يعطيكم العافية.
Okay, thank you so much. I can only agree. It is, especially in crisis, it's necessary, and rebuilding after crisis as well. Yeah.
شكرا عايدة، شكرا جميعا، شكرا أنكا لوجودك معنا، وكمان شكرا لميري لمساعدتنا في الترجمة، وشكرا لكم جميعا لحضوركم هذا الورشة رقمها 62. باسم جمعية المدربين شكرا لكم كمان مرة، والجمعية الألمانية، وإن شاء الله في لقاء آخر. يعطيكم ألف عافية.
الله يعافيك.
Thanks for the bunch of very interesting questions.
يعطيكم العافية.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you.
Thank you, Anki.
Thank you. شكرا.